Welcome to Sensory Memory for VCE Unit 4 Psychology, presented by Andrew Chua. Now we're going to explore in this the relationship between sensory memory and the other types of memory, other stages of memory, short-term memory and long-term memory, as well as look at the properties of sensory memory, that is, iconic and echoic memory. To begin with, let's look at the Atkinson-Sharif information processing model of memory, which starts off with the idea that incoming information from the environment, that is, sensory information, vision, sounds, smells, taste, or touch, all go into sensory memory, the first stage. Now this then, the stuff that we attend to, pay attention to, is the stuff that then gets passed on to short-term memory, which is then encoded and stored in long-term memory, which wouldn't be much use unless we were able to retrieve it back into short-term memory or working memory so we can think about what's going on with it. Now sensory memory basically receives all available sensory information in the environment right now, whether again it's your vision, your hearing, your smelling, your tasting, and your touching. Now all that information overlaps somewhat to give us the perception of continuation, like the different pages of a flip book. And the last thing is that's important to realize that although we receive all available sensory information, only some of that received information is attended to, selected about, and passed on to short-term memory. Now, supermarkets in the olden days used to have different registers to process different information or different things. So there might have been a cash-only register or a credit card-only register. In the same way, our brains have separate registers or processing spaces for the different type of senses. Now for Unit 4, we only need to know of two of these registers. The register responsible for visual information and the register responsible for hearing information. The first register for visual information is called iconic memory. Icons on your computer, like little pictures. Now, so iconic memory receives all the visual information. The most famous experiment in this area was conducted by Sperling using a tachyoscope, a device that flashes information very quickly onto the screen. Usually 12 letters are presented for 1/20th of a second. So say for example, you have 12 letters presented, and then people had to write down as many of the letters as they remembered. Now generally only 4 to 5 can be written down before the other letters fade out of memory. So the question is, do people have all the letters in their sensory iconic memory or only a bit of the information? What they found was that even when people have flashed that information and then played a tone to recall the letters on that row, like a high tone for the top row, a mid-tone for the middle row, or low tone for the low row, they found that people could recall all the letters of that specific row. This meant that even though they were able to actually hold the total image in their sensory memory and recall or access the information from any part of that overall image. So by playing around with the time period between seeing the letters and the tone sounded to prompt the recall, Sperling was able to work out exactly how long information is kept in sensory memory, and that is 0.2 to 0.4 seconds. Now if sensory memory was visual information was only kept much shorter than that, we would have this series of unconnected images. When they are 0.2 to 0.4 seconds, we get smooth motion. the this of course gives us a perception of continual motion. However, if visual information was kept longer than 0.4 seconds, then we would have a different look. So that's why iconic memory, visual information, only has a duration of 0.2 to 0.4 seconds. It's enough information to allow us to connect the images into a sequence of continuous motion, but doesn't have us have the image retain too long that we have that ghosting effect. Now the second register that we need to know for VCE Unit 4 is echoic memory, which is all about auditory information. Now, have you ever been in a situation where you're in a conversation, someone's talking to you, and they said something, and then you say, "What?" And then a few seconds later, you actually work out what they had to say? In a similar way, they did an experiment where a person was asked to read a story and ignore what anybody else was saying around them. So the people around them were saying some numbers, and at some point a tone was sounded, and you had to repeat the numbers you heard just before the tone sounded. Now participants were able to pretty much recall the last few numbers spoken, even though while they're reading they didn't think that they heard the numbers spoken at all. But when the tone was sounded, they were able to shift their attention to the numbers and recall them. And so the echoic register, the echoic memory, seems to last for about 3 to 4 seconds, which is really about the length, the duration of an average sentence. So what we have here, separate registers for sensory information or sensory memory. Iconic memory is visual, lasts for 0.2 to 0.4 seconds, and allows all the images to be connected into a continuous sequence. Echoic memory is about auditory information, goes from 3 to 4 seconds, and allows us to connect words into sentences. So we can see that the Atkinson-Sharif information processing model shows that sensory memory deals with all incoming information, but only the selected bits of information we pay attention to gets passed on to the short-term memory. So in summary, we can say sensory memory has a capacity that is unlimited. It means that all possible sensory information can be attended to if we wanted to. However, the duration of that information lasts from approximately 0.02 to 4 seconds. Now, and the source of information is from the senses, and detecting information from the environment. So sensory memory, has that capacity, that duration, and has that source of information. Short-term memory, however, has only a capacity of 7 plus or minus 2 items. The duration of short-term memory is 18 to 20 seconds. The source of information is from sensory memory as well as long-term memory, and it's maintained by rehearsal. Sensory memory, we can't rehearse, we can't maintain it. It's just whatever's there at that point for that duration. Long-term memory, however, has unlimited capacity like sensory memory, but the duration is relatively permanent. Now, the source of information of long-term memory is information that's been encoded from short-term memory and obviously stored in long-term memory with the right retrieval cues. And information in long-term memory is maintained through semantic network linkages, being connected into the semantic network and being accessed. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation on sensory memory and how it relates to the other types of memory, as well as specifically the subset of sensory memory being echoic and iconic memory. All the best.